Don't look now, but Illinois is the wild card in the Big Ten title hunt in the 2025 season. Now, in a vacuum, it might not be that surprising that a team that finished 5th in the conference last season, was a top 20 team at the end of the season, and beat a potential playoff team in their bowl game would be in the title hunt the following season. But this is Illinois we're talking about. And we're not just talking about Illinois in any Big Ten. This is the 18-team Big Ten madness that's been created over these last couple seasons of conference realignment. And Illinois is competing against not only Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Indiana, all who they finished behind last season, but then you have the likes of Michigan, USC, Wisconsin, Iowa, all teams that have a higher cachet than Illinois itself. Maybe Indiana doesn't, but we've seen what they've done last season. But as we saw in the first season of the 18-team Big Ten, it does lead specific advantages depending on the schedule you get. And this season, Illinois might just have an opportunity to replicate what Indiana did last season and just beat the people that are on their schedule. Before we get too far into it, check out this sick Ayo Dosunmu jersey that my wife picked up at Marshall's for me right before I did this Illinois video, which is awesome. And also make sure that you like and subscribe. We're trying to get as many college football videos out as we can before the 2025 season starts, so make sure that you're along for the ride. When you look at it, what Illinois did last season was not that much different than what Indiana did. Obviously, it's more impressive because Illinois has some history. They've had Brett Bielema kind of building up a little bit over the last couple years, and Indiana kind of came out of nowhere. But just wins and losses, who they played and who they beat, who they lost to, Illinois was a pretty similar season to Indiana. They have 3 losses, all in conference, on the road to Penn State, on the road to Oregon, and then the loss at home against Minnesota. If they don't have that loss at home against Minnesota, 25-17, coming off the Oregon loss, maybe their season looks a lot different, right? All in all, probably one of the better seasons they've had this century at that school. Maybe of all time. I'm not super familiar with Illinois college football history. But that Minnesota loss at home, when they had the lead with about 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and they end up giving it up to Minnesota, that really stings what could have been maybe a team that was in the conversation with South Carolina, with Alabama, with Ole Miss at the end of the season. Probably not getting in the playoff, but at least being in that conversation. And as we saw, they beat South Carolina in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, which I bet you didn't know that the Citrus Bowl was now sponsored by Cheez-It. They beat South Carolina in that bowl game, and you can say whatever you want about bowl games, and I agree. I don't think that bowl games are that important anymore, but they still beat South Carolina in, one of the biggest non-playoff bowl games. So maybe they would have done something in the playoff, or at least had a bigger conversation if they didn't have that loss against Minnesota and really didn't get blown out by both Penn State and Oregon. But they had a little bit of a tougher schedule than Indiana. Otherwise, they kind of did the same thing. They won the games they were supposed to win besides the Minnesota game. Now, they are coming into the 2025 season. They have an even easier schedule. Coming into the 2025 season, they have a more similar schedule to Indiana, to what Indiana had last season. Their non-conference schedule is really easy besides a game at Duke, which I think that Duke is never really that good. Let's be honest. Even when they paid $4 million a year or whatever for Darian Mensah, I don't think it's going to work out the way they think it is. But that's probably going to be a top 25 matchup early on in the season. If they can get that win on the road, that's a big resume booster. And then in the Big Ten schedule, they do have probably their second toughest game as their conference opener at Indiana, which is going to be a huge game. I think that game might be underrated looking into the season, but Illinois at Indiana on Saturday, September 20th. That might be the biggest game in the country that weekend. I haven't seen what else is going on, but that might be the biggest game in the country. That might be the game day, big noon game, whatever decides to go there, because the winner of that game has a chance to really wreak havoc on the rest of the Big Ten race. Just like Indiana, they didn't win the Big Ten, but they were in the conversation the last week of the season. I think if some things fell a different way, if Penn State didn't come to it, would have been Indiana, Oregon in the Big Ten Conference Championship game. Indiana made the playoff, right? And based on that, I mean, if you're in the top 4 of the Big Ten or if you're in the top 4 of the SEC, you have a really good chance of getting into the playoff. So that game might just be for who's the 4th best team in the Big Ten. And we might look back on that game in September to who showed up at that game in September and say, that is why they're in the playoff. Other than that game, The only other really tough game that you're like, I don't think that Illinois can win this, is on October 11th when Ohio State comes to Illinois. And that is the game that might just ruin whatever the Big Ten has going on as far as projections. That might ruin everyone's projections right there. But before we get into that game specifically, let's talk about what Illinois had going on last season and what they're bringing back. They are fourth as far as returning production for this upcoming season in the entire country. Number one in the Big Ten as far as returning production. And some of these rankings for returning production are like Rutgers is number 2 in the Big Ten. Wisconsin is number 3. Yeah, but Rutgers and Wisconsin sucked. I think Rutgers did make a bowl game, but Wisconsin was like 3-8. So some of the returning production things don't really matter that much. And yes, it does factor in like transfers in and things like that. So it's really maybe the production that they did somewhere else. But it's still an important metric. And Illinois is not Rutgers or Wisconsin. Last season, they were 10-3, right? They were in the race, maybe not for a Big Ten championship, but they were the number 5 team in the Big Ten. So returning production is important, especially when they're ahead of all the teams that were ahead of them in the rankings last year as far as returning production for this season. Not only that, Bret Bielema has been at this for a long time. I was actually, I haven't been paying attention to Big Ten football up until last season, when I started this channel, and obviously the Ducks go into the Big Ten, so I'm watching the Big Ten, and watching the Oregon-Illinois game last season, I was like, Bret Bielema, huh? He's been doing this for a long time. So for some of you young skippers out there, and maybe just people that forgot, Bret Bielema started coaching in 2007 as a head coach with Wisconsin, and he was one of the most successful Wisconsin head coaches. He kept Wisconsin as a perennial top 25, top 15 team through his 5-6 years there. Went to 3 Rose Bowls, lost them all. But what he did do is in 2010, Wisconsin beat Ohio State 31-18 at home. And it was the first victory over a number 1 ranked team since 1981 for Wisconsin. So that's nothing to sneeze at, right? Bret Bielema knows how to win big games in the Big Ten. He made, I think, a bad decision to go to Arkansas. I think he thought that he was going to make some big or SEC power out of Arkansas, and that just was never going to be true. I think that he left a good thing with Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I think, is one of the better jobs in the country if you know how to do it. But what last season proved, and really his tenure at Illinois, bringing them back, is that Bret Bielema knows how to win in the Big Ten. Bret Bielema knows how to get guys in and win games and win big games in the Big Ten. I think that Illinois is kind of under the radar as far as a really solid team that should probably do the things that Wisconsin did when Bret Bielema was there in the 2000s, right? They should be consistently one of the toughest games for the big teams. They should consistently win 9-10 games. And they should, every once in a while, be in a Big Ten championship game. And this is Bret Bielema's 5th season there, right? When you're rebuilding a program, it takes 4 or 5 seasons to get things back together and get going on the right path. I would say last season is the start of the right path, right? A 9-win regular season, 10 wins overall. That's going the right path. Top 20 finish in the country. That's going on the right path. Now this season, I think he's got to put it all together. And I think he's got to make this push. And again, the metric for a national season has changed, right? For the longest time, it was just that you're at the top of the polls, top of the newspaper polls. That's a national season. If you're in the conversation at the end of the season for 1, 2, or 3, that's a national season. Then it's being in the conversation for a BCS national championship, but it expands to being in a BCS bowl, right? Either winning your conference championship puts you on a national stage, or just being, the top 12 teams or something like that to be in the conversation for a BCS bowl, making it. That's a national season. And then it's being in the 14 playoff or being in the New Year's 6 bowls, which expanded it slightly more. Now the 12-team playoff, I don't think expands it so much. I think about the same amount of teams are going to be in the 12-team as there would be in the 14 playoff / New Year's 6 bowl. But especially for the Big Two conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, you can be in a spot where you can legitimately tell your fans, and your fans can legitimately think, we have a shot at a national championship. And like I said, for the Big Ten and for the SEC, that is finishing top 4. If you finish in the top 4 of those two leagues, you have a real shot, and not just a real shot, you probably should be in the college football playoff. This season, it's not set in stone. Probably in 2026, it's going to be set in stone that if you're in the top 4 of one of those leagues, you will be in the college football playoff. And that allows teams like Illinois, like Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin when they get it back together. Those level of teams, USC, because USC is now those level of teams. For all that you think that you're, national program, doesn't matter what your recruiting classes say. You're still one of those teams. You're not the top of the top anymore. Those level teams, on their best seasons, will have a shot at the national championship because you win your games, and maybe you get a first round bye, probably not, but you can get a home game in the first round. You get a home game in the first round, and then you have to win basically 3 bowl games. And it's a crapshoot. Generally, the best team is going to win. It's football. Generally, the best team is going to win. But when you get into those bowl game environments, it's a crapshoot as far as what's going to happen. So that brings us back to this Ohio State game. And remember the conversations about Indiana last season. Because Ohio State was kind of their one game on the schedule, although they did beat Michigan, and Michigan was nothing to sneeze at last season. I mean, they weren't national championship, but they were a good team, and they had probably the toughest schedule in the country. The conversations about Indiana last season was this Ohio State game is going to be the only time that we're going to see them against top-level competition. They just don't, as long as they don't get blown out, and they're 11-1 when it comes to the playoff, they should be in the playoff. And they kind of got blown out. They lost by less than 20. But I think that conversation is similar with Illinois this year, especially if they beat Indiana. If they lose to Indiana, which they very well could, Indiana's going to be good again this year. Again, I think it's going to be an amazing game. But if they clean up the rest of the schedule, that Ohio State game, if they don't get blown out at home, I think they should be in that conversation. If they're 11-1 with a slight loss to Ohio State, and really, even then, they might get another chance at Ohio State. 11-1 is an amazing season. Just because the Big Ten has 18 teams, you can have 4 of them at 11-1, and 2 of them aren't going to make the Big Ten championship game, which is crazy. But really, if they only lose to Ohio State, they probably have a good chance of being in the Big Ten championship game with the second shot at Ohio State, or maybe Ohio State loses to Michigan again and one other team, and they do the same thing they did last season. But I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that Ohio State wins that game. I think that Illinois has a chance to have 2 of the biggest games in the country, kind of like what we talked about with Texas Tech last season. Because these races are so important to what's going to happen at the end of the season, teams that wouldn't necessarily always have the biggest game are going to be in a position where if they just take care of their other games that aren't going to get as many eyes on them, they're going to get those primetime games just because of what race they're in. So they could have an opportunity if they beat Indiana in that first game, which I think should probably be one of the biggest games of the season, especially the early season. If they are both undefeated going into that Ohio State game, that is probably the biggest. I mean, that's kind of prime college football season, mid-October, but it's going to be an enormous game. And I think that Illinois has a chance to win it. I don't think that they should just be written off. It would be a huge upset, but they got him at home. They have the momentum. Ohio State came off of a national championship game. Ohio State hasn't proven to be that program that just wins year in, year out. They are always good, but they tend to have one season where it's like a destiny run that they put it all together. But they do fall off some seasons, fall off relatively. So they're not just some Titan that's unbeatable like Saban, Alabama. So that's going to be a very interesting game. And I think that the Indiana season last season, the Arizona State season last season, like We talked about with Texas Tech in my last video. Illinois this season. Tennessee last season to some degree. Those kind of seasons are a new thing for college football, where it's like, it doesn't matter so much who's on your schedule if you're in these bigger conferences, especially the Big Ten. I think the Big Ten, it's too much. They got to start kicking. They got to get Northwestern out of there. I think really, you got to get Northwestern and Maryland out of there. But those bigger conferences, you can get an easy schedule, relatively easy schedule. You're not going to place all the top teams. And if you get out of there with 1 or 2 losses, what is there to keep you out? You're a 1 or 2 loss Big Ten team. You're a 1 or 2 loss SEC team. Maybe that starts to change, but I think it's going to actually be baked in even more with the changes they make in the college football playoff. And it's so hard to say that, yeah, we know Purdue sucked, but Purdue had to play like 5 top 25 teams last season. They had to play like 4 top 10 teams last season. So, yeah, they didn't have any FBS wins, but also, like, does that mean that if they were in the Mountain West, they would have no wins? No. So it's so hard to kind of make heads or tails of what these conferences are nowadays, that just putting together a strong season, if you're one of these teams that are the second level, like I mentioned in the Big Ten, maybe Tennessee is out of that level, but Arkansas, Auburn, South Carolina, I think we'll talk about South Carolina next week. Those level of teams that aren't the top of the top in their conference, but they have been good. They have had good seasons. If they put together some seasons that were maybe not look like you could easily write them off because it's like, yeah, it's Arkansas, so they shouldn't be in the BCS National Championship. You can't necessarily say, well, they shouldn't be in the 12-team playoff. They're a 10-win SEC team. They're a 10-win Big Ten team. And I think Illinois has a chance to make that happen this year. And it would be very interesting. I'm kind of rooting for them. They don't play Ducks this year, so I'm kind of rooting for them to be the other team. And they play at Washington, so I want them to beat Washington. But I think that they have a chance to be a sneaky Big Ten team that should have a real chance at the playoffs this season. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe to my channel. And if you made it this far, make sure that you leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Illinois, what you think about these bigger conferences, and kind of these mid-tier teams that might have a chance at getting in the playoff. Anybody else that you think falls into that kind of area for the Big Ten or the SEC. But if you would like to watch more of my videos, I do have those for you. My most recent video here is about Texas Tech. I mentioned it a couple of times in this video, so check that out, see what they're making, the changes they're making to their organization down there in Lubbock. Up here, I've got another one of my videos. This one's about Notre Dame and if they got lucky last season, so make sure you check that one out as well. Other than that, I got my subscribe link over here, and we'll check you next time. See ya!